All right, so we are back for another month of Graphite updates. Kevin, I heard from you that we have quite a lot going on right now, so I will let you take it away.
Okay, yes, we have had a very productive month. So, very quickly, if you're just tuning in for the first time and not sure what Graphite is, we are building basically a professional grade graphics editor that's both for vector and raster editing. The entire thing is in Rust except for the front end, which is web based. And the main goal here is to have everything be node based. So that way you can take more of a procedural approach, doing some of the cool things you might do in Blender geometry nodes or in Houdini or in your compositing software of either Blender or Nuke, or basically taking all of your existing destructive workflow and making it non-destructive, but still putting in a pretty familiar package that artists are already pretty familiar with. So getting straight into it, this past month, I guess it's been a 5-week month this time, so it's been a good time to have a lot done. But we have worked on a number of things, and this is really only just the highlights here. I can just quickly start reading through a few of them, and then I could show off the ones that I can actually demonstrate. So the first one to show off, or the first one to talk about, is that we have moved the color workflow from gamma to linear. So previously, our nodes were basically sending bitmap data through the node pipeline, through the render engine, and they were all working in a gamma pipeline, which basically means that all the color channels had an exponent to them. So now they've been moved to linear, so all of the nodes that interact, if they do need to work in a gamma pipeline, they will transition to gamma and then do their calculation and then go back to linear, rather than the reverse, where everything was starting out in gamma, having to go to linear, or a lot of things that required linear had to go to linear, and then back to gamma. And then some of our nodes actually don't care. Some of the calculations work either in gamma or linear, so they actually don't have to do a conversion before or after this switch from gamma to linear. Okay, the next thing is we have a whole bunch of new adjustment nodes, and some of these are actually really difficult to implement because there's pretty much zero documentation anywhere on the internet about how they work. So I can quickly show off a few of these. Here's a photo that I took nearby my house, and I'm going to now show off the levels node. So this is, we actually did have this node before, but it had some issues, and now it has been fixed. So basically we can increase the shadows. So now the shadows are taking more influence on the image. They're basically moving the left side of the histogram to the right and making the entire image darker because we're compressing the entire image to more of that side of the histogram now. We can also increase the highlights. So now the bright parts are getting brighter, the dark parts are getting darker. And then we can also change the midtones by shifting them to the side. So now we're basically forcing that histogram of pixel brightnesses more to the dark side or to the light side. And then we can also just reset this back to before and kind of just look at how the highlights affect things. So we can keep increasing it more and more this way or more and more this way. You'll notice that some of the performance is still a little bit slow to update. That's because we are now working on GPU execution, and one of the talking points later in that list that I just had open is that we did get some groundwork for the GPU execution, but now this month is what is our plan to get that all finished. So now that also Chrome has released Web GPU as its newest API in Chrome 1.13, we are going to be able to utilize that. So any Chrome-based browser, at least on Windows and Mac, unfortunately it has not come to Linux yet, will be able to use Web GPU and basically run compute shaders, which is what powers our node graph. That will be able to run much, much faster than having to do all this image processing on the CPU. And then also we can change the output levels here. So that is basically compressing the output rather than the input and kind of forcing everything to be either brighter or darker, like that. Capping its min brightness or max brightness, essentially. The other node we worked on was exposure. This previously was implemented, but implemented incorrectly, so now we have a correct implementation here. So we can change the exposure by decreasing or increasing the exposure. So it's a nice, easy way to do something that kind of looks like if you were changing the EV value on a camera. Just like this. You can also change the offset. So that basically changes the base level at which it's counting for the offset. Well, kind of hard to explain. I don't know. But it offsets a part of that. And then finally, the gamma correction. This basically allows you to apply your own gamma. So if you for some reason had an image that was in linear but needed to be in gamma and it wasn't already converted for you in the pipeline, you could do that. Or you could also do the inverse of 2.2, which I believe is like 0.8 or something. Like this. I guess I could check by saying 1 divided by 2.2. That would be, actually 0.45. So 0.45 would be looking like that. So I could also do another one here, duplicate the exposure node, and now I could do 2.2 and basically reverse it back to normal. So here it was before, here it is after. And of course, you can actually change the exposure because that's the whole point of the exposure node. Okay. The next one is brightness and contrast. So this is the one which has no documentation online at all, and I had to do some crazy figuring out of things. But yeah, you can actually change the brightness. This is a little different from the exposure that I just showed in the previous node. And then also contrast, so I can basically crush this histogram. And the way this ultimately works is it is generating basically a levels node. It's generating a curves node. Or it's generating a curves image filter. And we actually don't have a curves node yet, but we will soon. But essentially it's generating a curves node which has 4 points that define a curve according to the contrast value and also according to the brightness value. And these sliders essentially shift around that. Then also there's legacy mode, and this does not use curves. It instead just kind of applies sort of a constant offset in division. So feel free to take a look at the source code to see how that works, which is possibly the only open source code that explains how these work. Maybe GIMP would have been available. I maybe should have checked that, but yeah, at least that was all I could find. I had to do some math and figuring things out here. The next one is the channel mixer. Basically what you can do is you can say, I want to target the red channel, and so the red channel naturally will have 100% by default. Also the green channel will have green of 100% by default, and the blue will have blue 100% by default. But basically you can get the other channels to have influence even in this channel. So the blue channel now has more influence from the red channel and less from the green channel, for example. So you can, I want to make my scene less, or let's see, more green, but in the blue channel. Or maybe I want to have the green channel have less green in general. So we'll reduce the green. And then you can also tell it to be monochrome, in which case instead of affecting all the 3 channels, you're basically just affecting the output gray color based upon the red, green, and blue. So of course if I reduce the green, then we have almost nothing left in the image because the image is mostly green, except for the flowers. And then finally we have a constant value which basically applies an offset, and that also existed in the red, green, blue version. So yeah, that's also taking in kind of the standard adjustments that you get from most image editing software. Oops, I didn't mean to delete that. And then we finally have the selective color. So this is the last of the ones that we added this month, which gets us relatively near completion of most of these standard adjustments that exist in most image editing programs. So we have the reds. We're targeting the reds, and there's actually not many reds in this image, so not much is happening here. But we can go over to, let's say, the yellows, which might affect the poppies a bit more. So we can increase or decrease the cyan, but I guess cyan doesn't really have much effect in this case. But we can increase and decrease the, yeah, there you can see. The magenta is affecting the poppies a lot. And the yellow, decreasing and increasing, of course, the poppies there. And then, of course, we can go between absolute and relative mode, which basically you can just try out which one looks better. And, of course, we can go to the greens, and this is going to have a much bigger effect. And I'll just play with it real quick before moving on. So, yeah, absolute and relative. Just play with the one, whichever one looks better. So yeah, those are the new adjustment nodes that have been added. And let's see, let's move on to the next one. So now, the very exciting thing is we finally have a brush tool, which is possibly kind of an important feature in image editing software. So you can go ahead and, say, pick a color, like, I don't know, let's draw a butterfly in here, to the best that I could attempt to draw a butterfly. So I'll go with a kind of a small brush size, And let's go ahead and add a little bit of a butterfly shape, I guess. So fill this in with some of this yellow color, some of this pinkish color. And then I can draw with additional parts on the next layer with additional colors to kind of fill it in here. This is not looking like a very nice butterfly, unfortunately. But I can go with a new layer. It's limited to only having one type of color per layer, but let's go with, actually I'm gonna change the color of this. So here I can show you how you can change the color of the entire layer, and that's why at the moment it's limited to one color per layer that you've drawn on. It's just because we only have one color choice here. Let's make it a blue butterfly, I guess. And then let's make a new layer and draw what else looks like a butterfly. I don't know, maybe like a brownish color for the body portion. Definitely use reference if you're making a drawing that actually should look good. Then I can also make another one which is smaller again, let's say 10 pixels, and let's also increase the hardness to like 90%. So now we can see, I don't know, they totally have antenna, right? And maybe we can give it a little bit of a border to its body as well, or to its wings. And then we can draw some little patterns on a third with a different color. So let's pick, actually, well, this original color was fine for this one. And basically I'm going to go back to the primary color, which is this one. And I'm going to go with an even smaller brush size, and I'm going to make it 100% hardness, but I'm going to say 50% flow. So the flow basically affects how opaque it is. And I can draw some little things that definitely is a real pattern on real butterflies for sure, without any question. Okay, there we have our terrible butterfly, and group those all together. And now I can just scale this group down and put it on one of the flowers, because that is beautiful, totally a masterpiece. So yeah, and that was basically a quick demo of the brush tool. One thing that's kind of cool though is if I wanted to change the size of those antennae, for example, so I drew the antenna here and also the outline of the body, all I have to do is decrease the diameter by typing 5 in here, and it actually re-renders the brush stroke. Or I could type, I don't know, 50 if I wanted to go crazy, and it will re-render all of those drawings that you did, because all we're doing is we're recording your mouse movement and re-rendering it each frame. I can also decrease, the flow if I wanted it to appear less visible, more transparent, and also change the hardness, make it softer or much harder. So yeah, that is what you can do with the brush tool. The performance does suffer a little bit, but that will improve once we have the GPU execution this month. So now the tools have color choices. So as I briefly showed here, any of the tools let you choose either between the primary, so this is your primary working color. This other one is your secondary working color. So these are the same across all tools. I could switch to a different tool and switch to a different tool, and they're always going to stay the same. And by default, some of the tools will either use the primary or the secondary. So you can see that the primary is used, and that's why it looks green. But I could also go to a custom one, and now it's black, for example, and then I can change it here. And I could even remove it entirely if I wanted to have no color. And those will stay with the tool. So I switched to a different tool, now we have different primary and secondary, and then I switch back and it will stay with the tool. So at the moment we have it set to none on the text tool. I can go to the rectangle tool, and we have, it'll look like this because we have the primary used for the border or the stroke, and the secondary, which is the blue color, used for the fill. And then of course, once you've drawn it, you can go, like always, and make adjustments here in the properties panel once the shape has already been drawn. Yeah, so that is the ability to make changes quickly to your tools. So you might say, I want to use the secondary color instead of the primary color. So I'm going to draw this shape, and then I'm going to go back to the primary color and draw a new shape that is green. And then I want to do a third layer and just quickly change it to some other color, like this one, and then draw that one as well. Okay, next one is that, gotta rush through these. The next one is that text layers have been converted to the node system. So previously, we had a bunch of different types of layers. We had vector layers, we had image layers, we had stable diffusion generation layers, we had, and And then finally also the text layers, and this was the last one. So we've drawn something and we have no color because remember I turned off the color, so let's give us a color real quick to see it. So now this is no longer its own separate layer type. It is now part of the node system, which means that all the layers that exist, they just say layer, they have a little layer icon, and they all have their own node graph. So we can see that, you know, the butterfly, for example, had a brush node, and that feeds into the output. This text tool now has a text node, and you can always go modify the text here. So you can see now we have the text, of course. And now we also, of course, it feeds in through the transform and the fill. So that applies the positioning as well as the fill color, which we have here, and also the stroke, which we have here. So the stroke could actually give it a bit of a outline if you wanted. So that now is all standardized in the node system. So we only have layers, these node-based layers, and our next step is removing these layers and having a single node graph for the entire document. And that hopefully will be coming in the next month or two. Okay, next is that points of shapes can be nudged and transformed. So if I'm going to draw something, let's say I wanted to draw a pentagon here, and I wanted to resize these three. So now I can actually just select them and hit S, just like Blender style shortcuts. You can hit S and then scale things around. So I can say I want to scale it to 0.1, so that's 10% of its original size. And then I can hit R and do 180 and rotate them like that. And oh yeah, I can also do G and then X and then constrain it to the X-axis. Yeah, and you can also nudge them around. So you can select these ones and then move them around like this. So this is something that I wish other vector editing programs, like I frequently use Adobe Illustrator, and I really wish that it had the ability to more easily just rotate and move points around like this. Yeah, next item on the list. Getting through these quickly now. We have fixed some of the major issues with images. So in one case, any file that embedded an image basically stored the red, green, and blue channels as ASCII with like 10 points of precision. So you'd have 10 ASCII characters representing, or like 12 ASCII characters representing a floating point number for both the red, green, and the blue, and the alpha channel. And it basically made any document you saved like 50 to 100 megabytes, which was crazy, even though it only had like a few kilobyte image inside. So that is now saved as base 64, so much more efficient. And additionally, we have fixed some other crashes related to the fact that we were running out of WASM memory because we were never evicting any of those images every time they changed. Finally, so we've done some groundwork for GPU execution. So now the next step is basically integrating it with WebGPU, and that's what we're working on right now. And also the groundwork for the node-based layer system that is now going to be, basically we have added a layer type which exists, and it's not useful at the moment, but that's moving towards having this be the mockup. So implementing this mockup, this basically is a mockup I created for how the node system will work very soon. But basically these are layers here. So each of each of these are layers, and we have now begun working on how these layers are represented. And a major task for me coming up in the next few days is to edit the CSS to basically represent all of what you're seeing here with an upgrade to the node system. And with that said, I believe we are done. Yes, we are done. So thank you for your time again, watching every month. And if you'd like to get involved, please check out our Discord, also our website, and play around with the editor. The editor is still deploying a version that's about a month old. So if you do want to try out these newest changes, go to the master branch, which is deployed at dev.graphite.rs. And we'll try and get that the official editor stable release deployed relatively soon. But yeah, come join the Discord and say hi, and maybe pick up an issue or two. Thanks for listening.
Awesome. So we have a few questions here in chat. Thanks for showing off everything. It's super cool to kind of see how the brush is evolving. One question about the brush. When using a brush, you showed that changing the hardness or flow after having drawn on a layer. Does this mean that the brush strokes are stored in some representation internally and rasterized from that?
Exactly, yes. They are stored as points. And then they get rasterized on the fly.
And now, just kind of like transitioning this from like several months back, where we were taking a look at like how brushes were then drawn on top. Has there been any like progress in like that brush system of how strokes and everything are kind of combined, or?
I'm not sure I understand the question because we have not had brushes until now. We did have the freehand tool, which is this tool here. So I can draw just a shape, but these are all vector shapes. So, I can just move these points around. I can turn it into any other shape. It's basically, I can even like double click on a point and give it curves. So this is basically a quick way to draw a vector shape, whereas this other one is actually raster based.
Well, so I think what I'm thinking, maybe it's just my terminology here is a bit missing, but like when you're showing off the work that you're doing for your masters, like how there was some stuff there, and I think I interpreted that as just being for brushes.
Yes.
But were those?
That was all a separate code base, very much a prototype that would take a while to implement in
Okay,
Rust.
okay. Yeah, okay, that's fair. I think for myself, definitely cool to see like that. I mean, even now, you could draw a brush and then presumably once that version is available sometime off in the future, just you have all the data there already, and then you can just add the new brushes to that.
Yeah, it's sort of, we would have to make a whole bunch of nodes that kind of work together. It's sort of a family of nodes that all build out that system of essentially creating a procedurally defined brush, which reacts to different things, different parameters, such as your brush pressure, your pen pressure if you're using a stylus, and the tilt angle and things, where it would sort of do a procedural material definition that gets wrapped around your brush movement. That was the focus of my thesis, and that will be something we implement probably over the next 6 months or a year, unless someone really likes that idea and wants to join the project and do that for us right now. That would be, I don't think it's really blocked in anything, so that could work.
Awesome. Another question here: how often do you push alpha releases to your website?
It's gotten a little less frequent lately because I guess we want to stop breaking people's files. So we'd rather they just use an old version of the editor for a longer period of time rather than having their files break every day. So it's been more like every month or so lately, but we typically try and do it like every 2 weeks. That will be the goal. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think we have the same thing with Valorant, where it's been like, we stopped. We went to like a weekly release, and eventually it'd be nice as a game to have like every just stable release that comes out, and then content is added in between them. But yeah, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, one thing we really need to do relatively soon is come up with a strategy for a file format, a proper file format, not just using Saturday to write out some JSON text of our internal representation of our structs, but actually a proper file format that has backward compatibility. Because every single time we ever make a change to our internal document format, or the node graph format now, it does basically break anyone's files that were using those structs.
Yeah, JSON, certainly JSON goes a long way before you have to potentially consider these issues. I guess, like versioning is a big thing.
Yeah, but it has allowed us to move quickly, not having to support people's files.
Exactly.
But of course, that unfortunately means we don't really get to let people continue to publish their files, because if someone even bothered to publish their files, or if we bothered to publish a demo file, like this beautiful artwork here that I worked on a few weeks ago, it's already out of date. You can't open it anymore.
Yeah.
It would be nice to be able to publish these so people could play around with them.
But, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, but they are short-lived.
Just one more comment here. Rob Swain mentions that they love the UX touch of dropping the node between two nodes, and it gets inserted between them. So nice little.
That is super important.
Yes, gotta keep it feeling good. Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, Keevan, thank you so much for the updates.
I was going to say quickly, we also want to be able to have drag one of the nodes that already exist and shake it with your mouse, and it'll break free of its connection, which is basically the opposite of that operation.
Yeah,
that is something we want to add, but it just takes a little bit of effort, because you gotta have a little bit of an algorithm in JavaScript that figures out, are you shaking? And if you're shaking, are you really shaking, or are you just accidentally moving your mouse sort of back and forth a little bit? We don't want to have too many false positives or false negatives. So
Exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
if someone wants to contribute an algorithm, I did look this up and could not find any kind of pre-existing algorithms for shake detection of your mouse because it's sort of a very specific thing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, this would be a really great Rust crate for anything. I think is just have the ability to do gestures and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it
Interesting.
might be able to be Rust. It probably would be better being JavaScript just because it's such a self-contained thing and it's very close to the
Yeah,
front end. It's dealing directly with user input, and pretty much the user input is the entry point of the JavaScript project,
yeah,
and everything else then gets redirected to Rust as basically as
yeah.
events.
I mean, you can always ship a Rust project in like as a JavaScript package with like Wasmer. I think that's
Yeah,
like a new thing that they have. It is like a little bit extra file size, I suppose, but um, hey, if someone wants to make it, it sounds like he'll get some stars.
yeah,
Um, oh yeah, okay. I guess another suggestion here: click drag, press another key or mouse button to disconnect the node. So I guess in that case, it's more like what shortcuts could you use to make
yeah.
that feel
Instead
good
of
as
the
well?
shaking,
Uh
that's
huh.
true. We definitely could add like a shortcut either to you tap it and it immediately disconnects if you're already dragging, or alternatively hold down the key to kind of as soon as you start dragging, it'll disconnect it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even just thinking a little bit more though, like if I wanted to use Graphite on an iPad with a pen, then me being able to shake the pen to do something there or like interact with this, I have to use fewer shortcuts.
That would be
Um,
cool. Yeah.
yeah,
We definitely
interesting.
plan to eventually support iPad, but it's the kind of thing where we definitely are keyboard focused at the moment, and we will have to work later on once we have enough features and sort of figure out how we can take a strategy to changing what we have at the moment and tweaking it to work better without keyboard.
All right. Yeah. Well, good stuff. Thank you so much for presenting this month, and excited to hear about the updates in the future.
Yeah, thanks.